I wasn't able to get the microphone after Sam Fox spoke, but the one question I had, and they wouldn't give me the mic, but I have it now, is I wanted to ask him what happened to that cook or chef that he broke his arm, whether he's still with him or not. So be interesting. I don't think Sam's back here yet. I'm Jesse Curley. I'm president of Supima, a premium cotton and a premium cotton brand grown primarily in the San Joaquin of California, but a variety that was developed here at the University of Arizona. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce Charles Best, who's founder of DonorsChoose.org. DonorsChoose is a nonprofit organization that provides a simple way to address the educational inequities. At DonorsChoose, public school teachers can create classroom projects, and donors can choose projects that they want to support. DonorsChoose is one of Oprah Winfrey's ultimate favorite things and was recently featured as one of the 50 most innovative companies in the world. Charles is a very humble person, but he's made a huge impact on the public school system, particularly in the poverty areas of the United States. He only gave me about 6 sentences to introduce him, so I had to Google and get a little more information. But he's done a tremendous amount, and in a little more than 11 years ago, he was a history teacher in a Bronx school when he came up with the idea. At 25 years old, Charles saw the disconnect between the public schools and the community and the potential for generosity from the community. Teachers needed money for things like, believe it or not, for pencils, for crayons, particularly for projects like visiting museums, class projects to go out and see different things. There just wasn't money for it. And Charles started DonorsChoose from his classroom in New York, getting his fellow teachers to sign up and request things they wanted most for their students. Today, more than half the public schools in the United States have at least one teacher working on the project with DonorsChoose. Supporters and board members include Stephen Colbert, Oprah Winfrey, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This year, the foundation has an estimated 450 people will give $80 million to classroom projects. And Charles has a goal to see 1 million people give over 100 million people to these projects in high poverty area schools. He states that we need to put the public back in public schools. So I'm really proud to welcome Charles Best, but first I'm going to let Oprah Winfrey and Stephen Colbert say a few words. Thank you.
There are few times in history when the saying, "we're all in this together," would be more applicable than right now.
Charles Best, he came up with a revolutionary idea during lunch in the teacher's lounge.
My colleagues and I were talking about books that we wanted our students to read, field trips we wanted to take them on, art supplies that we needed, but these ideas wouldn't go beyond the teacher's lunchroom. And then I just figured that there were people from all walks of life who wanted to help improve our public schools.
Through DonorsChoose, ordinary citizens can directly fund projects initiated by enterprising public school teachers.
Teachers request dictionaries, science kits, field trips, resources that their students need to thrive. Then you can give to the project request that most inspires you with a donation of any amount.
It's such a simple, wonderful idea. You know exactly who you're helping and how you're helping them.
I love to give and know that I have a connection.
It's a very easy way to give back to public schools.
This is exactly the kind of social innovation we should be encouraging across this country.
I love DonorsChoose.org, and it's why I'm on the board and why I'm committed to helping it in any way I can.
Make sure you check it out, DonorsChoose.org.
Let's not underestimate the power each of us has to change the world for someone.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you. Jesse, thank you so much for that really, really kind introduction. Thanks especially to each of you for lending an ear. It's been years since I've been to Tucson, and I figured that before speaking with you, I should get a feel for this city. Now, we're going to be talking about this new frontier of crowdfunding and peer-to-peer commerce, and I figured I should use that as my lens for taking the pulse of Tucson. So first I went to Kickstarter. How many of you have backed a project on Kickstarter? Raise your hand. All right, it looks like the vast majority of you. For the few who didn't raise your hands, Kickstarter is a funding platform for creative projects. Last year alone, people raised more than $500 million through the site for wacky and awesome ideas. And here are 3 projects that people in Tucson have recently gotten funded through the site. On the left, you see a movie, Grace of a Stranger, that a filmmaker here in Tucson named Troy Holler wanted to make, inspired by an autobiography written by a Tucson prison inmate that he wrote when he was part of the University of Arizona Creative Writing Workshop in the prison system. Now, Troy needed $25,000 to make that movie, and that's what 250 people gave him. In the middle, you see an image of a cotton candy startup created by a woman named Kate Keelan here in Tucson. She spins cotton candy that's organic and fair trade and has flavors like chili or basil or lavender, and she wants to scale up that business, get some more cotton candy spinning machines, be able to put barcodes on her cotton candy. For that, she needed $5,000, and 160 people from all over the country gave Kate those funds. And on the right, you see a book of illustrations and poems about creepy and adorable animals that a Tucson poet named Jessica Friedberg wanted to create. To do a print run of this book, she needed $3,000, and that is what 60 people gave her. Now, only 5 years ago, these creative people, Troy, Kate, Jessica, they would have needed a rich uncle or industry connections or years of working their way up the ladder before they could have done these projects. But Kickstarter does away with all that. It lets you ask your friends and the world at large to support your creativity without any gatekeepers or tastemakers standing in your way. If your idea is awesome, it'll probably get funded. So after checking out the Tucson offerings on Kickstarter, I went to Etsy. How many of you have bought a product on Etsy within the last year? Let's see a show of hands. All right, great. Even more than a backed a project on Kickstarter. For the few who didn't raise your hands, Etsy is a marketplace of things that are made by hand. And I bet that few of the folks in this room know that Tucson crafters have 62,000 different items for sale on Etsy. We are looking at 3 of them. On the left, you see diapers for fowl, for a goose or a duck. So if you have a pet duck or a pet goose, and you want your pet fowl to be able to walk through your apartment, you want to put a diaper on them, and you can buy goose diapers made by a Tucson crafter on Etsy. You might want to drive around with a decal on your car or your truck that alerts people to the fact that your vehicle is a zombie response vehicle. And you would buy that auto decal from a Tucson crafter. And maybe you'd want to take a picture of your baby with a sailboat prop, and that sailboat prop would be made by a crafter here in Tucson. Now, most of the folks who have items for sale on Etsy used to work office jobs all day, reluctantly. They really wanted to be crafting, but they could only do that as a hobby in their spare time. Few of these folks could have scored the investment you need to make a prototype that a factory can manufacture, or persuade a company like Macy's to sell their product, or raise millions of advertising dollars to get consumers to buy their product. That's a process which lets only a lucky few become designers, and of course it's a process that can sometimes suck the personality out of your creation. But then Etsy came along, and now crafters can pursue their passion as their day job and sell their creations to people all over the world. They don't have to break through all the barriers that until recently stood in the way of anyone who wanted to make beautiful things for a living. So after checking out the Tucson offerings on Kickstarter and Etsy, of course, I had to take a look at some of the 1,200 classroom project requests that Tucson teachers have gotten funded through our site. On the left, you see kindergartners in Mrs. Cisneros' classroom. She teaches not far from here, or in southwest Tucson. And she wanted manipulatives and counting games so that her students could learn how to count and stay on track to the Common Core math standards. She needed $600 worth of math materials so that her students could get physical with numbers and cardinality, I think they call it. And 8 donors from all over the country made her classroom dream come true. In the middle, you see 2 high school students in Ms. Erickson's high school class, not far from here. And Ms. Erickson wanted her students to read Hamlet and also read an interpretation of Hamlet which would show just how spicy and even violent and scary Shakespeare's literature is. 3 donors, only one of them from Arizona, made her classroom dream come true. And on the right, you see students in Ms. Bravo's special education class. She wanted her students to create art collage recycling bins and to start a recycling program in her school, and for that she needed $400 worth of art supplies, which 3 donors made true for her. At DonorsChoose.org, teachers go straight to the public with their best ideas for helping students learn. They don't have to first pay their dues or get the sign-off of an administrator or fill something out in triplicate. In fact, there's nothing standing between their idea and a potential supporter. There's a change underway which I want to talk about with you this afternoon. It's a change in who you have to know, and how long you have to wait, and how lucky you have to be to bring a good idea to life. It's about a new kind of marketplace where gatekeepers do not stand in your way. DonorsChoose.org is a pioneer of this movement. Some people call it crowdfunding, others call it micro-giving. You might relate it to peer-to-peer commerce. And so I want to tell you the inside story of DonorsChoose.org and tell you a few discoveries that we've made which could inform your work as retailers. Let me ask for one last show of hands. How many of you had a teacher in high school who changed your life? All right, good. Even more than backed a project on Kickstarter or bought an item on Etsy. That is awesome. I also had a teacher like that. His name was Mr. Buxton. There he is. He was my English teacher and my wrestling coach. And when I showed up as a dorky freshman in high school, Mr. Buxton spoke to me like he would to any adult. If he approved or disapproved of something I'd done, I knew it right away because he didn't have that mask that some adults have when they're talking to kids. If I asked him a question on Wednesday, he'd come back to me on Friday saying that he'd thought about it. And he really had. He made you feel like he wanted you on his team. And looking back on it, I think it was Mr. Buxton who made me want to be a teacher. So 14 years ago, I started teaching history at, jumping ahead. 14 years ago, I started teaching history at Wings Academy, a public high school in the Bronx. But the high school where I was teaching did not have the same resources as when I was in Mr. Buxton's classroom. Where I went to high school, we went on field trips into the woods. We had graphing calculators for trigonometry, the supplies to do just about any art project we did not want for anything. When I started teaching in the Bronx, I saw firsthand that all schools are not created equal. My colleagues and I would spend a lot of our own money on copy paper and pencils, and we would talk all the time in the teacher's lunchroom about books that we wanted our students to read and a field trip we wanted to take them on, art supplies to do an art project. What I wanted for my students was Little House on the Prairie. Those of you who only saw the TV show might think I was dumbing things down, but those of you who read the book will remember that Little House on the Prairie is a gripping, unsentimental account of pioneer life. I will talk all afternoon about how awesome this book is, but I will stop myself. And my students, even those who had never left New York City, they also loved this book. But the New York City public school system was not about to underwrite copies of Little House on the Prairie for each of my students. So every day I would wake up at dawn, I would go to the copy shop that was open 24 hours a day, and I would make photocopies of that day's section of Little House on the Prairie, which probably violated a whole lot of copyright laws. And as I was making photocopies, I started thinking about all those resources that my colleagues wanted for their students. And it occurred to me that there must be people out there who'd want to help teachers like us if they could see exactly where their money was going. So using pencil and paper, I drew out a website where public school teachers could create classroom project requests and donors could choose a project that they wanted to support. For $2,000, a programmer who had recently arrived from Poland was willing to build that site. Version 1 was super rudimentary. The back end was one page that you'd have to scroll down for like 15 minutes to get to the teacher or the project that you were looking for. To process a donation, I had one of those black boxes that you see at the grocery store where they punch in your credit card number and the dollar amount, send it over a telephone line. So it's like PayPal, but by hand. And it was a really good thing my students were helping me to get the site off the ground. Then I had to get my colleagues to try out the site and post the first projects. Now, I don't know how it is at your workplaces, but at the high school where I was teaching, if you wanted to get teachers to do something, if you wanted to get folks to do something, you gave them free food. And what you see right there is my mom's roasted pear dessert. She makes these roasted pears with orange rind and apricot jam and spices, and let me tell you, they taste something delicious. So my mom made 11 of these pears, and I brought them into the teacher's lunchroom, and as my colleagues prepared to pounce, I said, hold up, there's a toll. If you eat one of these pears, you have to go to this new website called DonorsChoose.org and ask for whatever it is you most want for your students. Propose the project that you've always wanted to do with them. Sounded like a pretty good deal. Took my colleagues like 2 minutes to scarf the 11 pears. And then they proceeded to post the first 11 projects on our site. The health teacher, she was the first to eat the dessert, and she wanted to do a pregnancy prevention project with her students, for which she needed Baby Think It Over dolls, which are life-size, life-weight dolls that cry at 3 in the morning and need to be fed and show a teenager what their responsibilities would be if they became a parent. The English teacher, he ate the dessert next. He wanted to get his students ready for the SAT, so he requested test prep books. Art teacher, she wanted to do a wall-to-wall quilt with each of her students sewing a square, and for that she needed fabric and thread and needles. My aunt, who's a nurse, she funded the first project, but I didn't know any more donors to fund the other 10 projects, so I funded them myself, which I could afford to do because I was still living at home with my parents, and they weren't charging me any rent, so I could spare some of my teacher's salary to fund those projects. And because I donated to my colleagues' projects anonymously, they mistakenly thought that the website actually worked. And that there were all these donors just waiting to fulfill teachers' classroom dreams. That rumor spread across the Bronx, and teachers started posting hundreds of projects that needed a whole lot more money than what I could afford by living at home with my parents. And I was in a really tough spot, not knowing how I was going to get these projects funded. My students came to the rescue. They could see the potential of this experiment to change their lives at school. And I think they also felt bad for me. So for 4 months, they volunteered every day after school to spread word to potential donors. They addressed and compiled 2,000 letters by hand to people all over the country, telling them about this website where someone with $10 could be a classroom hero. We sorted the mail ourselves to get the cheapest postal rate, and every desk in my classroom was piled high with envelopes representing a different region of the country. Then we crossed our fingers, and we carted the sorted letters to the post office. It worked. My students' letter writing campaign generated $30,000 in donations to projects on our site. We were off. Another year went by, and more teachers in the Bronx created projects. Donors funded some of them. And then 9/11 happened. And teachers at the schools beside Ground Zero started creating projects on our site to recover from the attacks on the World Trade Center. There was a math teacher whose students' calculators were sealed at the disaster site. Their classroom had been relocated to a basement, and she was requesting a new set of calculators. There was an art teacher who wanted to bring in an artist who had immigrated from Afghanistan to do workshops so students could learn about that country. There was a first grade teacher whose students had been saved by a particular group of firemen, and her first graders wanted to thank the firemen who had saved them by doing a musical performance in front of their fire ladder company, and for that they needed musical instruments. There were hundreds of these projects related to 9/11, and I thought that local media would jump on this story. This was right when people yearned to participate in the 9/11 recovery effort. The Red Cross had almost too many blood donations than they could put to good use, and here was this direct way for people to help. but no reporter would give me the time of day. I think I must have called 100 of them with no success. So I figured I'd better aim higher. The Holy Grail was the New York Times. They had a new reporter covering nonprofits and philanthropy. Her name was Stephanie Strom. And I figured if we could get Ms. Strom to do a story about our nascent website, we would have a shot at big-time impact. So I put together a package of materials, and I mailed them off to Ms. Strom at the Times. I didn't hear back. So a few weeks later, I called her up, and she was nice, but she said that we were awfully small potatoes. She said, if ever I'm doing a list of online charities, which at the time was a new concept, maybe I'll put you on that list, but I'm afraid you're not exactly newsworthy. Damn. So then I found a directory of the top people at Newsweek, and I called the senior editor there, Jonathan Alter. I called him first because with the last name of Alter, he showed up first in the alphabetical directory. And I called him during my lunch hour, and his assistant must have been out to lunch because he picked up the phone. And I said, hey, I'm a teacher up in the Bronx. I started this nonprofit with my students. Do you want to hear about it? And he said, sure. He didn't hang up on me. We talked for 45 minutes, and that night, he wrote a column for the Newsweek website saying that this experiment growing out of a Bronx classroom might one day change philanthropy. So then I called up Ms. Strom at the New York Times all excited. I was like, hey, Newsweek saw us as newsworthy, at least for their website, so won't you give us a second look? And then she dashed my hopes. She said, I wouldn't touch your story with a 10-foot pole now that another reporter has covered you. The New York Times does not follow in the footsteps of other publications. Oh, I felt like an idiot for having told her that another media outlet had broken our story, and I wrote her an email apologizing for being so dumb. And she could tell how badly I felt, and so she took pity and she wrote back, and she said, you shouldn't feel quite so bad because you didn't have a chance in the first place. Because her editors had asked her to focus on charities responding to 9/11. So there was my last opening. I spent 3 hours crafting this email to Ms. Strom at the Times, telling her about all the projects that teachers beside Ground Zero were creating on our site, focused on 9/11 recovery. And I called her up. I called her purposefully over the weekend, so I knew I would go straight to voicemail, and I wouldn't interrupt her while she was on deadline. And I said, this is the last time you'll ever hear from me. If you could just read this one final email. Monday, I was back at school teaching, and I checked my email in between periods. Ms. Strom had written back. She wanted to come do an interview for a major feature story in the New York Times. Now, let me tell you, my parents raised me to be humble, but this was the New York Times. It felt like the skies had opened, and I just had to shout. So I forwarded Ms. Strom's email to my friend, and I said, guess who said she wouldn't touch our story with a 10-foot pole and now wants an interview? That's what hustling will get you. I beat my chest. I talked all kinds of smack. I thought that I'd hit forward. But I'd hit reply. And the moment I realized, I yanked the electrical cord from out of the socket to turn off the computer, but I was too late. I sent that trash-talking, guess who said she wouldn't touch our story with a 10-foot pole and now wants an interview email directly to Ms. Strom, philanthropy reporter for the New York Times. So naturally, I sent her another email apologizing for being so dumb. And to Ms. Strom's eternal credit and mercy, she did not hold it against me. She went on to write a feature story for the Times saying that DonorsChoose.org might be the future of philanthropy. And since that time, what's now almost 15 years ago, we've been striving to prove her at least partially correct. As of today, as Jesse mentioned, more than half of all the public schools in America have at least one teacher who has created a classroom project request on our site. 1.5 million people and partners have given over $300 million to projects delivering books, art supplies, field trips, therapeutic horseback riding, to 14 million students, overwhelmingly from low-income communities. My students and I never dreamed I would one day get to go to a conference like this and speak to folks like you and share numbers like those. And we sure as heck never dreamed that crowdfunding would become part of the zeitgeist. When DonorsChoose.org began, crowdfunding was years away from even being a word. And today, it's something of a movement. There are now hundreds of websites where people on the front lines can identify a need they see, propose a project they want to do, secure a microloan for a small venture they want to start, and then anyone, no matter the size of their wallet, can become a patron, a financier, a philanthropist. And I wager that crowdfunding is only going to get bigger. I'll bet you that within the next 10 years, crowdfunded projects and ventures will account for a real percentage of our country's GDP. So now I want to explain quickly how we've made crowdfunding work in public schools. When a teacher creates a project for funding, we first make sure it's legit. And we email follow-up questions to the teacher if anything is unclear about just what students will really learn. This school year alone, we're going to get 200,000 classroom project requests, each of which has to be carefully vetted and reviewed before being posted. We used to pay people to do this mountain of work, and then we realized that our best teacher users were ready and willing to vet other teachers' project requests. So now if you're a teacher and you've had 20 projects funded through our site, we invite you to volunteer to vet other teachers' projects. Think of it as academic peer review meets Wikipedia. And now that we crowdsource this vetting labor to our best teacher users, instead of paying people to do it, the average time it takes us to vet and post a teacher's project has gone from 10 days when we were paying people to do it to 1.5 days now that we've turned to our best teacher users, now that we are pushing intelligence out to the edge and seeing our so-called beneficiaries as our coworkers, which is what crowdfunding is all about. So now the project's up on DonorsChoose.org. At any given moment, there are about 40,000 project requests live on our site. That's a lot to choose from. So we encourage donors, when they get to our site, to express a personal passion and look at the projects that match that passion. A few years ago, a writer for Fortune magazine was doing a story on Kiva and DonorsChoose.org as the two websites that Fortune thought were going to change philanthropy. And when we were done talking, the writer seemed decently impressed by our site, but he said that his personal passion was saving the salmon in the Pacific Northwest, which is a nice way of saying he would not be contributing on our site because education wasn't quite his cause. But before he left the room, I did a keyword search for salmon on our site, and up came 5 classroom projects focused on salmon in the Northwest. The second project result was from a teacher in Oregon who had created a salmon hatchery in the river flowing by his school, and he needed hip waders for his students to maintain and build out the salmon hatchery. The top result for keyword salmon in the Northwest was a project from a teacher on an island off Alaska, teaching in a one-room schoolhouse. She wrote in her project essay that she was 45 minutes away from the nearest store by airplane, and her students are Native Alaskans, and they had recorded their parents' folk tales about salmon, done research on salmon, and wanted to share that work with the outside world, for which they needed a printer and a scanner. So here was this guy who had a passion for salmon and 5 projects to choose from. And as a result, there's a group of high school kids in Oregon who now have the hip waders they need to build out their classroom's salmon hatchery. Last part of the DonorsChoose.org process is the best part. When a teacher's project gets funded, we don't hand out cash. Instead, we purchase the resources and have them delivered to the classroom. So even if the project is therapeutic horseback riding for disabled students, we're paying the horseback riding stable to provide that service. And then every donor, even if they've given just $1, gets photographs of their project in action, a thank you note from the teacher, an impact letter that the teacher writes describing what students are learning, and a cost report showing how every dollar was spent. Donors who give $50 or more also get handwritten student thank you letters. Our donors get to see and feel the impact that they've made and even correspond back and forth with the classroom they chose to help. Throughout this process, we try to be completely transparent. I'll give you one example. Once in a while, actually about 3% of the time, the classroom is not able to provide those thank you letters, those student thank you letters. Internally, we call this a jilted donor situation. And it's usually for a good reason, like the teacher went on maternity leave or switched schools, but it's a jilted donor situation. And when this happens, we contact the donor and acknowledge that we've fallen short, even though they've probably forgotten that they were ever due a thank you package in the first place. And we offer to fund another project of their choice on our dime. Now, it sounds like maybe a fall on your sword kind of sacrificial thing to do, but most of our donors are blown away that we would proactively apologize for not providing that thank you package. And while very few of our donors take us up on the offer of our funding another project for them, our apology note does often prompt them to make a whole new donation. We once looked at the numbers and concluded that our biggest revenue driver was screwing up and admitting it. So that's how we began. That is how the model works. One of the ways that we think we can have an impact on the education system itself is by opening up all of our data, which we did 2 years ago. 250,000 teachers at half of all the public schools in America have created 800,000 project requests. And in that data are teachers trying to tell the powers that be what resources are most important, what topics are trending in their minds, what books get kids hooked on reading the best, what technology devices are most needed. We think we can make billions of dollars of government education spending smarter, better targeted, more efficient, more responsive by giving voice to classroom teachers, by opening up all of this data. We've also opened up the data so that people can make discoveries about what drives citizen philanthropy and kind of consumer psychology in a way that might overlap with the work that you do. I'm going to start off giving you a kind of a micro example. Our data science team ran a test to see whether a star or a heart is more effective as the icon for saving for later. You're probably familiar, if you remember a few years ago, going on Airbnb, if you liked one of their listings and you're like, oh, I'm going to come back to that, you would click on a star icon. And then actually they later switched it to a heart. And we were like, oh, I wonder why they did that. No matter the site, no matter the retail site, whether it's save for later or add to my registry or make this one of my favorites, you're probably all familiar with some kind of icon that lets a purchaser or a donor say, I'm kind of into that, I want to come back to that later. We ran a concurrent A/B test where visitors to our site were randomly assigned to either have a star icon or a heart icon as their save for later mechanism. And the impact blew us away. As you can see, we had a massive increase in the number of projects favorited and the number of keyword searches favorited when we used a heart. And most incredibly, the overall conversion of our website went up by basis points, but materially went up when we used a heart instead of a star icon. Now thinking about behavior more generally, we did an analysis of giving behavior based on gender and found that women give to classroom projects throughout the school year, unprompted by any special holiday or occasion, whereas men tend to donate to classroom projects on holidays. And it doesn't have anything to do with working or not working, because most people donate at around 10 a.m. at the workplace. And so our only hypothesis was that altruism comes most easily to women, whereas men need an external stimulus to be philanthropic. I'm not going to ask Leos and Cancers to raise their hands, because your cohort not only makes smaller average donations, but gives less frequently on our site. Aries and Taurus, thank you for giving frequently, but we wish that your cohort would at least get up to the average donation size. And by the way, this is statistically significant. We capture the birth dates of a six-figure number of our donors. Are there any Capricorns in the room who'd like to raise their hands and take a bow? Because not only do you make larger donations, but you give more often. Here's yes, congrats to those Capricorns. We'll get a little bit wackier. That horoscope finding made us think that we ought to explore wacky findings by people who study consumer psychology. And we read a book called Drunk Tank Pink, which showed that people are much more likely to donate to hurricane relief if that hurricane's name shares the same initial as them. So Terry is actually much more likely to donate even to relief for Hurricane Tom, just by virtue of sharing that first initial. Far more likely to donate when the hurricane shares even just your first initial. So then we were like, well, we've got hundreds of thousands of teachers and more than 1 million donors. We can do perfect last name matching, not just based on initial, but entire last name. So we sent out a poem that began by saying, roses are red, violets are blue, give to a teacher with the same name as you. And we did this on Valentine's Day. And that poem was immediately followed with a classroom project from a teacher whose last name was the exact same as yours. And the Twitter shout-outs, those are 2 of like hundreds of Twitter shout-outs that we got, is characteristic of the actual quantitative mass response to the email. We sent out a poem at the exact same time that was geo-targeted. It said, roses are red, violets are blue, give to a teacher in a classroom near you, which is like classic good marketing, right? Like hyperlocal, we're going to show you a classroom project right down the street after giving you a real neat poem. Well, that hyperlocal targeting did 1/3 as well as last name matching, even though we were matching up a donor with a teacher who's probably 10 states away, just because they really responded to this last name matching. I don't know if that gives you any food for thought for your own work in retail. I'm going to end now by just giving you a couple examples of how retailers have used DonorsChoose.org to integrate micro-philanthropy into the consumer shopping experience. It began with Crate & Barrel about 6 years ago now. Crate & Barrel sent a $25 DonorsChoose gift card to more than 100,000 of their customers. And a DonorsChoose gift card lets the recipient pick a project that they want to support, and they spend those 25 philanthropic dollars on the project that they like. Crate & Barrel sent one of these philanthropic gift cards to 100,000 customers with a cover letter basically saying, you've invited us to enrich your home by shopping at Crate & Barrel. So now we'd like to invite you to enrich a classroom. Here is a $25 philanthropic gift of giving to spend on the classroom request of your choice. Meanwhile, Crate & Barrel withheld a control group of customers sharing all the same characteristics, but who were not given the DonorsChoose gift card. And within the test group, those customers who experienced the DonorsChoose gift card went on to spend 16% more at Crate & Barrel stores over just the 6 months following their redemption of the gift card. And within the test group, the customers who received the gift card but didn't motivate to redeem it nevertheless went on to spend 5% more at Crate & Barrel stores. And that is why the Wall Street Journal did kind of their first major feature story saying, aha, here is a clinically proven instance where a company has done well by doing good. Here's just a sampling of companies that have used DonorsChoose.org as a point-of-sale proposition. And they do this because our observation is that the classic point-of-sale proposition where you say, would you like to round up your purchase or add $1 for a major national cause, is very often not the cause dearest to the heart of the consumer. And as a national cause, it's one where it's tough for the consumer to feel like their 56 rounded up cents is going to make a big difference. But by using the DonorsChoose.org API, a company can now actually say, hey, customer, would you like to round up your purchase for a classroom request half a mile from where we're standing right now? And they can name that classroom request if they like, or name the school. And that, we think, that's not pitching a customer on rounding up for a macro cause, that's inviting the customer to be a good neighbor, and the customer will be commensurately that much more enthusiastic. The best demonstration of this is a very spicy company. I don't know how many of you have played Cards Against Humanity. It's like a rated R version of Mad Libs or Apples to Apples. They have dedicated one product, their 2013 holiday card expansion pack, which is still selling like crazy. And if you buy this holiday card pack, the proceeds from your purchase go to a classroom project on DonorsChoose, but not just any project. They go to the most awesome classroom project that is closest to you. Under the hood, we've designated about 1 in 5 projects as especially awesome as part of our vetting process, and that's structured data. So what Cards Against Humanity does is, as you're going through the checkout flow, buying that card pack, Cards Against Humanity hits the DonorsChoose API, identifies the most awesome close by project to you, either to your IP address or your zip code. And then at the end of the Cards Against Humanity purchase flow, they say, now meet the teacher and the project whom you just supported by buying this pack of cards. And the customer doesn't need to leave the Cards Against Humanity website. Really what this all comes down to is giving donors and consumers the joy of giving, which crowdfunding and micro-giving and the internet now make possible, even if someone is not a major benefactor. So whether or not this gives you any food for thought, I hope you will at least go to our site and see what you and a dedicated teacher can do together when gatekeepers do not stand in your way. Thank you for your time. And we have 4 minutes and 16 seconds for any questions that folks have, and I will be certain and add at least 1 minute of free time to your day. Do folks have any questions? Yes? Yep. Sure. Sure. Yeah, so the question was about Adopt a Classroom. Adopt a Classroom is one of, gosh, probably 10 or 15 other education crowdfunding sites where someone can choose a school or a classroom to support. If you add up all of those other sites, combined, they constitute 1/8 of what's happened on DonorsChoose.org. So to put it another way, DonorsChoose.org has a greater share of education crowdfunding than Google does of the search marketplace. But each does actually have its own important specialization. I think of Adopt a Classroom as really sponsor a teacher, whereas DonorsChoose.org is more Kickstarter for public schools, where you're not so much sponsoring an individual and giving them a wallet to use as they see fit. Instead, you are picking a specific project that matches a topic you're passionate about or that's down the street from you. All right, well, maybe I will give you 3 minutes back of your day, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you again for your time.